Imagine a lavish ballroom glittering with chandeliers where a young couple stands at the center of the dance floor, exchanging vows with trembling lips. The groom, dashing in a custom-tailored suit, promises eternal devotion. The bride, radiant in a white gown, whispers her hopes for a fairy tale future. But beneath this perfect polished surface lurks greed, betrayal, and a shocking secret that will shatter their world forever. Little does anyone suspect that in just a few months, a pregnant wife will be cast out onto the streets, only for her billionaire father to unleash a vengeance so grand it topples empires. Buckle up, drama awaits. Evelyn Carter had always believed in fairy tale endings. Born into the distinguished Carter family, she had grown up immersed in old money traditions. Her father, Robert Carter, was a self-made billionaire known for his real estate empire that stretched from coast to coast. Evelyn's mother, Genevieve Carter, had passed away when Evelyn was only 10, leaving Robert with the sole responsibility of nurturing his only daughter. He overcompensated for his grief by showering Evelyn with comfort and privilege, ensuring she never lacked for anything. Despite her privileged upbringing, Evelyn was remarkably down to earth. She volunteered at local community centers, organized charity auctions, and found solace in painting. In her early 20s, she opened a small art gallery in downtown Philadelphia, hoping to give underrepresented artists a platform. While her father supported her endeavor financially, he admired that she handled the day-to-day work herself. Above all, she believed in love. Pure, unadulterated, unconditional love, the kind that bonded her parents together before her mother's untimely death. When Michael Thompson came into her life, she was breathless with anticipation. They met at a gallery opening she hosted for a young sculptor from Germany, and Michael arrived as a representative from a local media outlet. Well-spoken, stylish, and with a quick wit, he left a charming first impression. Intrigued, Evelyn found herself spending more time in conversation with him than with the very artists she was trying to promote. Michael Thompson did not come from wealth. Raised in a middle-class household, he had scrambled for scholarships to attend college. After graduation, he landed a job in advertising and marketing, building a reputation for relentless ambition. His suits were always pressed, his hair always neat, and he seemed hungry for success. Evelyn took his determination for passion, and she admired how he fought to rise above humble beginnings. The first time she introduced him to her father, Robert Carter, welcomed Michael politely, but he harbored reservations. He had seen countless opportunists lurk around his family, eager to latch onto money or status. In his eyes, Michael seemed too smooth, too quick to adapt to new social circles, and too eager to impress. Evelyn, however, was smitten. She believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, urging her father to trust her judgment. 6 months into their relationship, Michael proposed. He did it extravagantly, renting out a rooftop space at the prestigious Overbrook Hotel, where a live string quartet serenaded them under a sparkling canopy of stars. Dropping to one knee with an elegant platinum ring in hand, he asked for her hand in marriage. Tears in her eyes, Evelyn said yes. Overjoyed, she believed she had finally found the man who would love her unconditionally. The engagement set Philadelphia's high society abuzz. Magazines and newspapers splashed photographs of the couple. People commented on how lucky Michael was to be joining the Carter clan. Some speculated that his motives may be questionable, but others saw them as a handsome couple, an American dream story in the making. Evelyn's father concealed his lingering doubts, deciding that if his daughter was truly happy, that was all that mattered. Amid wedding preparations, tensions occasionally surfaced. Michael insisted on having the wedding in a more extravagant venue, a grand historical estate outside the city, while Evelyn wanted a small ceremony at her favorite garden near the art gallery. Ultimately, Evelyn conceded to Michael's wishes, convinced that he simply wanted her wedding day to be as memorable as possible. Her father wrote a hefty check to secure the estate, leaving the bride to wonder if money could truly buy the perfect day. As the wedding day approached, Michael showed subtle signs of anxiety, late-night phone calls. He kept private, hushed conversations about finances and persistent fascination with Robert's business ventures. Occasionally, Evelyn saw fleeting glimpses of something dark behind his charming smile, but she disregarded them as normal pre-wedding jitters. She was in love, and love, she reminded herself, had the power to conquer all. The morning sun shone brightly on the day of the wedding. The historic estate in the outskirts of Philadelphia was done up to resemble a fairy tale castle, towering arches, intricate stained glass windows, and a sprawling garden brimming with lavender and roses. Guests arrived in designer outfits, the women's hats ranging from sophisticated to outlandish. Reporters snapped photos from a discreet distance. Inside her bridal suite, Evelyn felt the rush of excitement and nerves. Her hair was pinned in an elegant updo and her makeup done to perfection. She wore a gown of pure white satin, accented with antique lace around the train. "You look stunning," whispered her maid of honor. Ava Richardson, a close friend from art school. Ava squeezed Evelyn's hands, trying to stave off the bride's mounting jitters. Evelyn's father stepped in, dressed in a classic black tuxedo. He stood in silence for a moment, seemingly overwhelmed by the sight of his little girl in her wedding gown. "You remind me so much of your mother," he whispered, his voice cracking. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes as she hugged him. She felt the ache of her mother's absence, but drew comfort from her father's presence. Robert gently guided her to a sofa and said, "My princess, I want to tell you something. Never forget who you are. Never compromise your values, even for the sake of marriage." He paused as if weighing his next words carefully. "And remember, if anything happens, anything at all, come to me. Promise me." She found the request odd, but she nodded. "Of course, Dad. I love Michael." Robert nodded. "Yes, but love yourself too, Evelyn." Though it sounded cryptic, she saw genuine concern in his eyes. She nodded again, deciding not to let worry overshadow her big day. The ceremony was breathtaking. As Evelyn walked down the aisle on her father's arm, the crowd rose to its feet, and hushed amazement fell over them. Michael stood at the altar, looking every bit the handsome groom in a crisp tuxedo, a confident smile gracing his features. The officiant spoke eloquently, weaving in anecdotes of love and commitment, and the couple exchanged rings. Vows were uttered, promises of everlasting faith, loyalty, and devotion. Yet Robert couldn't shake off a subtle unease. Perhaps it was Michael's restless gaze scanning the crowd, or the hint of triumph in his smile. "Am I overthinking this?" Robert chided himself. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on his daughter's obvious joy. The reception featured a 5-star catered dinner, jazz music, and dancing under crystal chandeliers. There was a dramatic, multi-tiered wedding cake, custom cocktails at the bar, and an elaborate fireworks display in the evening. If a perfect wedding existed, this was it, at least on the surface. Midway through the celebration, Evelyn was making her rounds, thanking the guests, when she noticed Michael in deep conversation with a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, with a slicked-back ponytail, dressed in an expensive suit, but wearing a smarmy grin. As she approached, she overheard the man say, "The next phase is tomorrow, right?" Michael quickly placed a hand on the man's shoulder, leading him away. When Evelyn asked about it later, Michael brushed it off. "Just a colleague from work," he said. Leaning in to kiss her cheek, she let it go, choosing not to pry. Later that night, after the last dance and final toast, the newlyweds retreated to their honeymoon suite. As she slipped out of her wedding gown, Evelyn felt both relief and a sense of exhilaration. Michael pulled her close, whispering about the future they would share, grand vacations, children running around a big house, dinners with influential people. She felt a small pang of unease. "I don't need all that," she insisted. "I just need you, me, and love. That's enough." Michael chuckled. "Sure, sweetheart. But we'll have all the luxuries too. Don't worry." He sounded so confident, so self-assured, that she allowed herself to believe him. Before dawn, they left for a 2-week honeymoon in the Bahamas. White sand beaches, turquoise waters, and candlelit dinners replaced the hustle of wedding festivities. Every day, Evelyn felt the tension in Michael's face ease a bit. Each night, they shared dreams of building a life full of possibilities. But on the final day of the honeymoon, as they strolled along a secluded beach, Michael received a phone call. Instantly, his demeanor changed. He became tense, curt, almost disturbed. The conversation ended quickly. When Evelyn asked, "Is everything okay?" he only offered a tight-lipped smile. "Fine. Work stuff. Let's go enjoy our last night," he replied. But he never truly relaxed again. It was the first crack in the foundation of their still fresh marriage. Upon returning from the honeymoon, Evelyn and Michael settled into a posh penthouse that Michael insisted they rent in one of Philadelphia's newest luxury buildings. While the monthly rent was exorbitant, he promised her that his career moves would soon justify the cost. Evelyn tried to contribute from her gallery's modest earnings, but Michael insisted she keep that money for herself and her gallery expenses. "I'm the man of the house," he boasted. "I can handle it." Evelyn was flattered and allowed herself to be convinced. She continued running her gallery, championing local artists and forging new partnerships. The more philanthropic side of her also led her to start an art therapy program for underprivileged children. She was busy, excited, and glowing with the satisfaction of seeing her dreams come to life. But not everything was perfect. As weeks turned into months, she noticed subtle shifts in Michael's behavior. He spent more time at the office or in business meetings, often returning late at night. Sometimes he would come home with the smell of expensive whiskey on his breath. Other times he was distant, as if locked in a world of secret ambitions. Their romantic dinners became less frequent, and his phone seemed glued to his palm, buzzing with suspicious texts at odd hours. One afternoon, Evelyn stopped by his office unannounced to surprise him with lunch. She was proud to carry a homemade meal she had prepared. She was greeted by an uncomfortable silence and curious stares from Michael's co-workers. An assistant whispered that Michael was in a meeting and couldn't be disturbed, guiding Evelyn to a waiting area. While she sat there, she couldn't help overhearing an animated conversation behind a door left slightly ajar. She recognized Michael's voice, stern and edgy. "I'm telling you I'll have the money soon," he insisted. "Once I can leverage my new connections, we'll be fine." There was a brief pause, and a second voice responded, "You'd better. I'm not waiting forever." Evelyn's heart thumped. She stood up to knock, but the door suddenly closed, sealing the conversation away. A few minutes later, Michael emerged, eyes widening in surprise at seeing her. "Eve." "Oh, what a pleasant surprise," he said, his voice laced with forced cheerfulness. She offered the lunch with a bright smile, but her suspicions now took root. Michael's handshake with the man he'd been speaking to was too abrupt, too uneasy. His entire body language reeked of stress. That night at home, she broached the topic only to be brushed off. Michael held her close, telling her she was overthinking. He chalked it up to the normal rigors of business. "We've got big accounts and everyone's pressuring me for results." Despite her concerns, Evelyn tried to trust him. She remembered her father's warning. Never forget who she was. Never lose her sense of self. But she was determined to stand by her husband. She concluded that her father had maybe been overprotective, and that any business relationship in a competitive field would involve some tension. Days later, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. A sudden wave of joy and apprehension crashed over her. She recalled how she'd always wanted children, but so soon. Would Michael be happy? Would it change their dynamic? She decided to surprise him one evening with a small gift box containing a pair of tiny baby shoes and a handwritten note that read, "Baby Thompson arriving soon." The nervous excitement nearly overcame her as she prepared a fancy dinner in their penthouse, lighting candles and setting the table with fresh flowers. When Michael arrived home, he seemed frazzled, undone by the day's events. He barely mustered a smile before noticing the box on the table. "What's this?" he asked in a worn-out tone. "Open it," Evelyn urged, heart pounding. He lifted the lid, stared at the baby shoes, and then read the note. For a moment his face was unreadable, some combination of shock, disbelief, maybe even annoyance. Eventually he pressed his lips into a tight smile. "That's amazing news," he said, giving her a guarded hug. Evelyn tried to focus on the positive. Though his reaction was not as exuberant as she had hoped, she assured herself that Michael simply needed time to adjust. The man was obviously stressed. Perhaps a pregnancy was an additional worry. "He'll come around," she told herself. "He loves me." She called her father the next day to share the good news. Robert's voice brimmed with excitement, a warmth she had longed to hear. He asked question after question. How was she feeling? When was her next doctor's appointment? Did she need any help or financial support? Every question felt like a gentle reminder that no matter how complicated her life became, her father would remain her anchor. She ended the call, uplifted, reaffirming her belief that life was about to enter a wondrous new chapter. But her faith in Michael would soon be tested in ways she never imagined. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and the walls of her fairy tale marriage began to crack under a relentless storm of ambition, secrets, and betrayal. By her third month of pregnancy, Evelyn was starting to show. She beamed whenever she felt a flutter in her belly, anxious and excited about motherhood. Friends flocked to the penthouse with gifts, and they cooed over the ultrasound pictures Evelyn proudly displayed on the coffee table. But amid the guests' visits, Michael's absences loomed even larger. He rarely joined Evelyn for prenatal checkups, citing urgent business matters. When he did make it, he was distant, barely paying attention to the doctor's explanations. Evelyn tried to remain patient. She reminded herself that Michael's work was demanding and that he was presumably toiling to create a financially secure future for their family. One evening, she could take it no more. She confronted him the moment he walked in, still loosening his tie. "Michael, we need to talk," she began. "I'm worried about us. I'm worried about you." He sighed heavily, dropping onto the leather couch. "I'm exhausted, Evelyn." "What now?" She swallowed her fear. "Where were you last night? You said you'd be home by 8, but you came back after midnight." Michael's gaze darted around, as if searching for a plausible excuse. "Meetings went late," he finally said, voice hollow. "Is that a crime?" She pressed on, her frustration boiling over. "You're never around anymore." "I'm pregnant, and I feel like I'm going through it alone. I just want to understand what's happening. Why all the secrecy? Why the strange phone calls?" Michael's face hardened. "It's business, Evelyn. You wouldn't understand." She flinched at his dismissive tone. "Try me," she challenged, stepping closer. "I'm not just some naive girl who doesn't get the real world. I run a gallery. I handle finances. I know things can get complicated. But you refuse to share anything with me." He stood abruptly, a frustrated growl escaping his lips. "Fine. You really want to know. We're having some cash flow issues at my company, and I've been looking for investors. It's not exactly stable right now, and I didn't want to worry you." Happy now. Though she appreciated the morsel of honesty, the hostility in his tone made it feel like an accusation rather than an explanation. She reached out to touch his arm, only for him to recoil, as if her very presence stung him. Days later, she discovered how dire those cash flow problems really were. Letters arrived in the mail detailing overdue bills. Email alerts warned of lapsed health insurance. Evelyn realized that Michael hadn't been paying for her prenatal care out of his pocket. Her father's insurance, still attached to a family trust, covered much of it. She felt a swirl of confusion and betrayal. The man who insisted on being the provider had grown cavalier with their finances. She approached him calmly, wanting to discuss the situation like responsible adults, but he was in no mood for discussion. "You have no right to snoop into my mail," he barked, eyes flashing. "I'm handling it. Stop acting like some controlling wife who's never had to struggle." "Michael, I'm just worried. We have a baby on the way," she reasoned. "Let me talk to Dad. He can help." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "Of course. Run to Daddy. That's what you Carters always do. Money can solve everything, right?" He was practically shouting now, voice echoing in the high-ceilinged living room. Hurt and stunned, Evelyn stepped back, tears stinging her eyes. She had never seen him like this, so full of resentment. "I'm just trying to keep our family afloat," she pleaded, voice trembling. "There's no shame in asking for help if we need it." Michael turned away, fury burning in his gaze. "I don't want his handouts. I don't need Robert Carter dictating my life, turning me into some puppet." The argument erupted into an avalanche of grievances. He accused her of being ignorant of the real world, of not having to fight for anything. She tried to defend herself, only to be met with more hostility. In that moment, Evelyn saw a side of Michael that was cruel, consumed with envy, and desperate to assert his pride. Finally, he grabbed his coat, yelling, "I need some air." Before slamming the door, he spat, "Stop meddling in my business, Evelyn." Or else. She stood, frozen hands instinctively cradling her belly. The baby sensed her distress, shifting uncomfortably. In that crushing solitude, tears streaked her cheeks. She knew something was terribly wrong with her marriage, but she held on to the faint hope that they could still mend it. That hope was shattered a week later. Michael came home in the middle of the night, reeking of alcohol and cologne that wasn't his. He staggered into the bedroom, flipping on the lights and waking Evelyn from a restless sleep. "Where have you been?" she demanded, heart pounding with dread. He sneered. "What does it matter to you?" She pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to calm the swirl of anxiety. "I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child. You can't just..." In a fury, he ripped open his shirt collar. I didn't sign up for this. You Carters think you can control me with your money, with your unborn brats. I refuse to be chained." Her voice broke. "I never tried to control you. I love you. Can we please?" Michael's eyes flicked to her belly, and his sneer deepened. "Love. If you really loved me, you wouldn't keep forcing me into your father's shadow. Maybe I was in love with the idea of you, the wealthy princess who could open doors. But now you're just a burden." A gasp escaped her lips. Tears blurred her vision. "Please don't say that. We can work this out." Suddenly, he grabbed her arm, dragging her from the bed. "I'm done. You and your father can keep the penthouse, the baby, whatever. Just get out of my face." He shoved her towards the door, and she stumbled, cradling her belly in fear. She trembled, staring at him in disbelief. "You can't mean this. Where am I supposed to go?" He yanked open the bedroom door, voice dripping with venom. "Go back to Daddy. That's what you always do. Just leave me alone." And with that, Evelyn Carter, pregnant and terrified, found herself tossed out of her own home, a home she had believed was built on love, but was instead fueled by Michael's greed and resentment. The doorman eyes filled with pity, watched as she left the building in tears, clutching a suitcase hastily filled with a few clothes and personal items. At that moment, she realized she had to face the harsh truth. The man she married had discarded her like a broken toy, and the father of her unborn child had turned into her worst nightmare. Evelyn's hands shook so violently on the taxi ride across town that she had to press them against her belly just to steady herself. The driver cast occasional glances in the rearview mirror, concerned for the fragile-looking woman who wept silently in the back seat. She felt a physical ache in her chest, like part of her heart had been ripped out. When the taxi finally pulled up to the Carter estate, a stately mansion set behind tall wrought-iron gates, she hesitated to step out. It wasn't shame exactly, but a sense of failure. She had left home in her wedding gown, brimming with optimism, and now she was returning disheveled, pregnant, and heartbroken. Gathering her courage, she approached the door and rang the bell. Her father's butler answered, eyes widening at the sight of Evelyn's tear-streaked face. "Miss Evelyn," he began, but she rushed past him, walking straight to the drawing room, where she sensed her father would be. Robert Carter was there, reading the morning paper with reading glasses perched on his nose. Seeing his daughter's state, he stood abruptly, alarm etched on his face. "Evelyn, what's happened?" She burst into sobs. The suitcase fell to the floor as she rushed into his arms. For several minutes, all she could do was cry. Words choked by grief. Her father stroked her hair, whispering, "It's all right. I'm here." Over and over, until her tears subsided enough for her to speak. Between sobs, she recounted the horrifying altercation with Michael, how he insulted her, how he was consumed with betrayal and debts, how he grabbed her arm and kicked her out in the dead of night. Robert's face hardened with every word, his jaw clenched so tight she thought it might snap. When she finished, he exhaled a tremulous breath, as though channeling a rage so profound he could barely contain it. "Are you all right? Is the baby all right?" he asked, panic creeping into his voice. She nodded, though tears still fell. "Good," he said, resolutely pulling out his phone. "Stay here. I'm calling Dr. Myers to come check on you. Then we'll talk." That night, Robert insisted that Evelyn move back into the mansion. The family doctor ran a full examination, assuring them that the baby was healthy despite the stress. Evelyn's anxiety slowly receded in the safety of her childhood home, surrounded by staff members who cared for her unconditionally. As the days passed, Robert tried to broach the subject of retribution. He wanted to take immediate legal action, possibly even file charges for assault. Evelyn, however, hesitated. She was heartbroken, not vengeful. Despite Michael's cruelty, a part of her still clung to the hope that he might come to his senses. She refused to escalate matters with the law, at least for now. Robert respected her wishes, though his anger simmered beneath the surface. He was a man of vast influence, someone who had built skyscrapers and orchestrated multi-million-dollar deals. Watching his daughter suffer at the hands of a man he'd long suspected was manipulative filled him with a near uncontrollable fury. But he took no immediate action, waiting to see if Michael would dare to contact Evelyn and apologize. A week passed. Then 2. Aside from a few messages from Michael's lawyer regarding potential separation terms, there was no outreach from Michael himself. Evelyn sank into a state of resigned despair, focusing instead on her unborn child. If Michael didn't want them, fine, she reasoned. She would raise her baby, surrounded by love from the Carter family. One evening, a manila envelope arrived at the Carter estate. It contained legal documents Michael was filing for divorce, claiming irreconcilable differences. Additionally, there was language implying that if Evelyn wanted any financial support for the child, she should sign a non-disclosure agreement about the details of their marriage. Essentially, he was buying her silence. When Robert saw the documents, he slammed his fist on the table. That ungrateful fool, he spat. His voice echoed in the marble-floored foyer. He marries my daughter, uses her name, and then discards her like this. He thinks he can bully her into silence. Robert's eyes narrowed. I'm going to ensure he never works in this town again. Fearful of her father's rage, Evelyn tried to intervene. Dad, please don't do anything drastic. I just want to move on. Robert placed a firm hand on her shoulder, his gaze softening momentarily. My dear girl, I understand your desire for peace, but some people only learn lessons the hard way. He messed with the wrong family. For a time, Robert took no obvious public action against Michael. He remained calm, quietly making phone calls late into the night. Evelyn overheard snippets. Yes, it's about the building. I need to speak with the board. She wasn't sure what he was planning, but she trusted her father's sense of justice. Robert Carter was known for his magnanimous nature until you crossed him, and Michael had crossed him in the worst possible way. Meanwhile, Evelyn sank into introspection. She poured her energy into the family library, researching legal rights for pregnant women, reading about child custody, and preparing for single motherhood. She found solace in the mansion's art studio painting scenes of mother and child, letting her emotions bleed onto the canvas. Her friend Ava also visited frequently, offering support and a comforting shoulder. You did nothing wrong, Ava assured her one day, as they strolled through the mansion's rose garden. Michael's issues are his own. He's the one who lost something precious. Evelyn nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. I believed in him. I thought we'd have a beautiful life together. Ava squeezed her hand. Believe me, someday you'll realize you dodged a bigger bullet than you can imagine. At her next prenatal checkup, the baby's heartbeat was strong, a reminder that life would go on. Evelyn tried to focus on that silver lining. She had a supportive father, loyal friends, and a stable home in which to raise her child. Michael's betrayal still cut deep, but she vowed never to let it define her or her child's future. However, in the back of her mind, she couldn't ignore the subtle changes in her father's demeanor. Robert Carter was too quiet, too composed, and far too resourceful. He was a man accustomed to turning the tides in his favor. If Michael believed he had the upper hand by filing for divorce first and humiliating the Carter family, he was sorely mistaken. Behind closed doors, Robert Carter was orchestrating a plan that would ultimately shake Michael Thompson's life to its core. Although he led Evelyn to believe he was focusing on her well-being, Robert was also quietly mobilizing his business network. People indebted to him, people who admired him, and people who feared him. He began at the top, conferring with his longtime friend, Stephen McAllister, the CEO of McAllister Financial, over late-night whiskey in Robert's private study. The two men pored over documents regarding Michael's advertising agency, the building it operated from, and the loans Michael had taken out. Stephen took a sip of his drink. "You've got him cornered if you want to push. The agency is nearly bankrupt. He's in default on multiple loans. The building's ownership is up in the air. A developer wants to sell it. You can swoop in if you're quick." Robert nodded, a predatory gleam in his eye. "That's precisely what I plan to do. I need to show him that you don't mess with my daughter. But I'll do it quietly. I don't want a public scandal for Evelyn's sake." Stephen grinned. "Quiet or loud, it's going to be humiliating for him." "I love it." Robert swirled the whiskey in his glass, his expression distant. He humiliated Evelyn. He laid hands on her while she's pregnant, kicked her out in the middle of the night. This is personal. I want him to understand the consequences of crossing me. But my daughter's dignity is paramount. No tabloids, no massive headlines. Understood. Stephen nodded. "I'll make some calls. We'll keep it under wraps as much as possible." The plan was thus set into motion. Robert's front companies began negotiations to acquire the building that housed Michael's advertising agency and several other businesses. Since Michael's agency was a flagship tenant, controlling the building meant controlling his professional fate. Every time a snag appeared in the acquisition process, Robert used his formidable resources to smooth it out. Money exchanged hands, strategic favors were called in, and soon the building was on the verge of a formal purchase. Unaware of these developments, Michael tried to portray himself as the victim in the eyes of mutual acquaintances. He claimed that Evelyn had been too controlling, that her father was meddling, that he felt like a prisoner in a golden cage. He also flaunted the impending divorce, insinuating that he wouldn't be left penniless. "I've got my own investments," he bragged to his colleagues, though many privately noted the cracks in his facade. One day Rebecca Cole, an acquaintance from the local elite circle, ran into Michael at a high-profile charity function. She was startled to see him with a new woman on his arm, a striking brunette who introduced herself only as Vanessa. Rebecca was aware of the rumors swirling around Michael and Evelyn's separation. Curious, she asked him directly. "I heard things didn't go well with Evelyn." Michael's grin was dismissive. "She and her father are cut from the same controlling cloth. I had to get out." He sipped his champagne. "Now I'm focusing on my career, my business. I'm about to close a major deal." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, but decided not to push. She found the entire situation sad. She'd met Evelyn several times at charity galas and always admired her kindness. To see Michael parading a new partner so soon seemed distasteful. She relayed the news to a friend, who relayed it to another friend, and eventually word reached Robert Carter's ears. Michael had replaced his pregnant wife with a new flame strutting around town as if everything was glorious. Robert took the news with a stony silence. He merely nodded, excused himself, and stepped out for fresh air. In reality, he made a quick phone call. Proceed with the final steps, he told his lawyer. I want the building by next week. The wheels were now in motion for the perfect retaliation. While Michael boasted to potential clients about expansions and new partnerships, Robert was already in the final stages of acquiring everything that sustained Michael's professional life. All that remained was the signing of papers, which Robert arranged for a discreet date and location, ensuring no rumors would leak prematurely. Meanwhile, Evelyn tried to rebuild her shattered self-esteem. She spent more time at her gallery, even preparing a new exhibit that focused on the theme of motherhood. She found a measure of healing in art, using bold strokes and vibrant colors to depict the complexities of love, betrayal, and rebirth. One afternoon, as she was rearranging paintings, she received a text from an unknown number. We should talk about custody. I want to be involved in my kid's life. Instantly, her stomach tightened. Michael's words, a swirl of anger and confusion, gripped her. He'd made no effort to reach out during the darkest weeks, yet here he was discussing involvement. She replied, "We can meet, but my lawyer needs to be present." He didn't answer. Hours passed, and she tried not to let the silence eat at her. Late that night, another text came. Don't bother. If you want to play hardball with your father's money, fine. You'll hear from my lawyer. She felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. Even his attempt at reconciliation came laced with threats and blame. Evelyn forced herself to set down the phone and breathe. She thought of her baby's heartbeat, steady and comforting. She thought of her father's unwavering support. She was no longer alone, and she was determined to protect her child from Michael's toxicity. He can't hurt me anymore, she told herself, unless I let him. A few days later, Robert slipped an elegant envelope under her door. Inside was an invitation to the building acquisition event, scheduled at a private conference room downtown. At first, she stared at it confused, then realized this had everything to do with Michael's building. She understood the significance of the invitation. Her father wanted her there to witness the turning of the tide. She hesitated, uncertain if she wanted to see Michael humiliated in a business setting. But her father insisted. You deserve closure, he said solemnly. You need to see that you hold the power to walk away, and that no one can take advantage of you again. Evelyn agreed, her heart pounding with a strange mixture of apprehension and anticipation. She wasn't seeking revenge, but perhaps by witnessing her father's final move, she could finally lay the ghosts of her failed marriage to rest. The day of the acquisition event arrived, and Evelyn found herself stepping into a sleek private conference room situated in the heart of Philadelphia's financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, while polished marble floors and modern artwork lent an air of exclusivity. Attendees were dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses, carrying leather portfolios and an air of confidence. Among them stood Michael Thompson, looking surprisingly calm, in a charcoal grey suit flanked by a handful of his business associates. Evelyn watched from across the room, momentarily struck by how little he seemed to have changed. He maintained the same perfectly styled hair, the same meticulously pressed suit. It was as if the months of turmoil had barely registered on his face. He caught sight of her and stiffened, then offered a mocking smile. She kept her distance, focusing instead on her father, who was surrounded by lawyers and financial advisors. Robert looked regal in a sharp navy suit, his silver hair neatly combed. A hush spread through the room as Robert signaled for everyone to take their seats around a large oval conference table. A man named Charles Whitmore, a prominent attorney in the city, stood at the head of the table. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for assembling here today. We are gathered to finalize the acquisition of the building located on Broad Street, currently owned by the Caldwell Gray Partnership with major tenant occupancy by Thompson Advertising." Michael leaned forward, cocky. He genuinely seemed to think he was about to make a deal that would resolve his agency's financial woes. He'd told multiple colleagues that he was on the verge of a significant breakthrough, believing the new buyer had an interest in injecting capital into the building and, by extension, into his company. Charles continued, "I represent Carter Holdings in this transaction. Today we will sign and finalize the purchase, after which Carter Holdings will assume full ownership and management of the property." Michael's posture shifted noticeably. "Carter Holdings." He glanced at Evelyn, then at Robert. Confusion and alarm flickering across his features. Robert kept his expression impassive, though a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Evelyn watched as Michael's associates exchanged panicked looks. They had been under the impression that some anonymous conglomerate was buying the building, not Robert Carter, father of the very woman Michael had kicked out while pregnant. Charles laid out the documents on the table. "This is the purchase agreement. Once signed, Carter Holdings will be the legal owner. Mr. Carter, if you will." With a steady hand, Robert affixed his signature in the designated spaces. Then Charles passed the documents to the other parties, the Caldwell Gray representatives and the building's co-owners, who likewise signed. Pens scratched on paper, each signature inching closer to finality. Michael's eyes darted around in desperation. He abruptly stood. "What does this mean for my agency?" he blurted. "We have a long-term lease. Are you planning to revoke it?" A nervous chuckle escaped him. My firm has rights, you know." Robert adjusted his cufflinks, then spoke in a level tone. "Your agency does have a lease, yes. However, I'm sure you're aware there are performance clauses. You've been behind on rent for 3 months. By the time the next cycle hits, you'll be 6 months behind unless you produce a significant payment. That constitutes breach of contract." Michael's face blanched. That's not accurate. We've had a few delays, but Robert held up a hand. "According to your own statements, you're operating at a loss. I have no intention of subsidizing your agency's shortcomings, Michael. Perhaps another tenant can make more profitable use of the space." Evelyn clenched her fists under the table, her heart pounding. She'd never seen her father so ruthless, yet she knew Michael had brought this upon himself. She sensed a flicker of sympathy for the man she once loved, but that sympathy was dwarfed by the memory of how he had shoved her out into the night. Michael swallowed hard, shifting his strategy to feigned humility. "Look, Mr. Carter, I know we've had our differences, but this is business, right? Maybe we can come to an arrangement. My agency can be an asset if we have the right support. We could partner." That single word, partner, seemed to hang in the air. Robert tilted his head slightly as though contemplating. Then his face hardened. "Partner," he echoed in a tone that reverberated with disdain. "Michael, if you had respected my daughter, if you hadn't thrown her out while she was pregnant, perhaps I would have considered a partnership. But you made your choices. Now you must live with the consequences." The entire room felt charged, like an electrical storm brewing just beneath a calm sky. Michael's associates stared intently at him, realizing their fate was tied to his next words. Suddenly, he flung his pen onto the table. "This is a personal vendetta," he spat. "You're trying to ruin me because your daughter couldn't handle." "Evelyn." pushed back her chair, the surge of anger eclipsing her usual composure. "Don't you dare blame me for your failures," she said, voice trembling but resolute. "You kicked me out of our home, you refused to support our child, and now you want to rewrite history. No, this isn't about me not handling anything. This is about you being held accountable." Silence engulfed the room. Michael stood there, eyes bulging, unsure how to counter. Then, with a sneer, he jabbed a finger at Robert. "You orchestrated all of this from the start, didn't you? You couldn't stand the idea that I might succeed on my own." Robert's expression was unmoved. "I did not orchestrate your failures, Michael. I simply took an opportunity when it presented itself. You had every chance to build something worthwhile. But your arrogance and cruelty toward my daughter have left you with no allies." Charles cleared his throat, attempting to keep the formal tone. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, the sale is final. Carter Holdings owns the building. We can discuss lease renegotiations or termination terms privately, if you wish. But as of now, your original lease terms stand, and you are in significant breach." Michael looked like he might lash out physically, but with cameras and so many witnesses, he restrained himself. His associates hurried to gather their briefcases, muttering about next steps. The room buzzed with uneasy energy. Robert turned to Evelyn, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "My dear, would you like to accompany me to lunch? I believe we've concluded our business here." She nodded, standing up to leave. Her face was composed, but inside she was shaking. As she walked past Michael, she paused, meeting his gaze. "I truly loved you once," she said quietly. "I'm sorry it came to this." His eyes flickered with a turmoil of emotions, anger, shame, regret, before he turned away, clenching his jaw. With that, Evelyn left the conference room by her father's side, stepping out into the sunlit hallway, where a sense of liberation washed over her. The man who had betrayed her was no longer an insurmountable force in her life. Though the path ahead wouldn't be easy, she was free. News of the building's sale and Michael's looming eviction spread quickly through Philadelphia's business circles. Some said Robert Carter's move was driven by revenge. Others called it strategic genius. Regardless, Michael's reputation crumbled. Clients fled, staff quit, and the agency stood on shaky ground. Back at the Carter estate, Evelyn embraced a quieter life. She poured her energy into preparing for motherhood, furnishing a nursery with soft hues and whimsical touches. Her nightmares of being thrown out began to fade, replaced by dreams of holding her baby. Ava remained a constant source of support, and the two spent more time focusing on the future than revisiting the past. Michael, meanwhile, scrambled to salvage his collapsing business. He tried everything new: investors, a rebrand, even a smaller office, but the Carter name shadowed him everywhere. He's blacklisted, some whispered. Eventually, he attempted to contact Evelyn through mutual friends, asking to reconcile for the child's sake. She responded through her lawyer, permitting no direct contact until after the birth. In an ironic twist, Robert repurposed part of the building into an art education center, inspired by Evelyn's philanthropic work. The project thrived, earning glowing media attention. Evelyn curated its gallery space, transforming it into a haven for young local artists. Michael's old office sat abandoned, an echo of the life he lost. When Evelyn went into labor on a crisp autumn morning, she was surrounded by love, her father Ava, and a trusted medical team. After hours of labor, she delivered a healthy baby boy. She named him Alexander Robert Carter Thompson, a nod to both the child's lineage and her hard-won independence. Michael's only message after the birth was a short text. Congratulations. I'd like to meet my son." Evelyn read it with mixed emotions. After consulting her lawyer, she allowed supervised visits strictly on her terms. Holding Alexander, Evelyn whispered, "You are my new beginning." Her old life had shattered, but from the pieces she was building something far stronger. Weeks after Alexander's birth, Michael saw his son for the first time in a softly lit mediation center. Evelyn, holding Alexander, sat beside her lawyer while a social worker observed. Michael entered, looking weary, thinner, humbled. He stared at Alexander, reaching out hesitantly. Evelyn allowed it, her heart torn. The baby fussed in his arms, and Michael's awkward attempt to soothe him revealed just how much he'd missed. "I'm sorry," Michael muttered, eyes downcast. Evelyn didn't respond with anger. Instead, she kept her tone cool. "We're here for Alexander. That's what matters now." In the months that followed, Michael maintained supervised visits and made sporadic financial contributions. His once thriving agency had vanished. He took up freelance gigs and consulting roles, barely staying afloat. Robert Carter stayed in the background, watching. He made no public comments, choosing instead to focus on Evelyn and Alexander. Social circles whispered Michael's name, always with scorn, always as a cautionary tale. Evelyn, meanwhile, found peace. She balanced motherhood with running her art programs, hosting workshops and galas in the Carter building. Recognition followed. At one event, Bill Gates visited during a tech conference, lending her efforts national attention. Michael noticed her rising influence. He tried harder with Alexander, reading to him, bringing small gifts. Yet the spark of ambition remained in his eyes. Evelyn set clear boundaries. No unsupervised visits, no decisions without her input. No sudden appearances. Over time, a cautious rhythm formed. Their conversations grew less hostile. Michael landed a steady job at a startup. He seemed to accept that his old life was gone, and maybe, just maybe, he was ready to grow. The scars, however, remained. Evelyn still remembered the night he threw her out, the cold rage in his voice. Therapy helped her separate co-parenting from the pain of betrayal. Her paintings captured that journey, raw, bold, honest. Even Robert Carter softened, if only for Alexander's sake. He doted on his grandson, taking him on garden walks and telling stories of Genevieve, the grandmother Alexander would never meet. By Alexander's second birthday, things had changed. Evelyn had grown into strength, Michael had been humbled, and Robert had protected what mattered most. The story wasn't about revenge, it was about rebuilding, and Evelyn had finally begun to reclaim her peace. Time passed, and Alexander grew from a toddler into a spirited preschooler. He had Evelyn's artistic eye and flashes of Michael's assertiveness. Evelyn's art programs flourished, expanding into local schools and gaining citywide attention. She split her time between gallery work and parenting, building a life rooted in passion and purpose. Michael remained on the outskirts. Running a modest marketing firm, he lived simply, drove a used car, and paid partial child support. His days of power plays and penthouse dreams were long gone. Communication with Evelyn was polite but distant, reserved for parenting logistics and school updates. Sometimes Evelyn saw regret in Michael's eyes, but she no longer needed apologies. Her path forward was already paved with resilience, not resentment. Robert Carter, older, now found joy in grandfatherhood. He funded a new wing at the art center in Genevieve's name, and often walked Alexander through the gardens, teaching him about family and legacy. For Alexander's 5th birthday, the art center hosted a cheerful party. Balloons floated, children painted, and laughter echoed through the halls. Michael showed up quietly with a thoughtful gift, crayons, paints, and a sketchbook. Evelyn nodded in appreciation. Robert observed from a distance, silent but watchful. After the cake, Evelyn joined her father near the windows overlooking the city. "You okay?" she asked. Robert turned to her, misty-eyed. "I'm proud of you. You turned pain into something beautiful." "I had help." She smiled, glancing at the joyful room. He nodded, then hesitated. "Sometimes I wonder. Maybe I should have let you handle things in your own way." She leaned into him gently. "You protected me when I couldn't protect myself. I'll always be grateful." Michael hovered by Alexander during the candle moment, unsure of his place. Evelyn motioned him forward. "Come stand by your son." For a brief moment, past wounds faded as they sang Happy Birthday together. As the candles flickered out, Evelyn closed her eyes. She had endured betrayal, heartbreak, and fear. But from it all, she had built something solid, something new. The story wasn't about Michael's downfall. It was about rising from ruin, fueled by love for her son, her family, and herself. She pulled Alexander close and whispered, "This is our life now. And it's just the beginning. Sometimes the most heart-wrenching trials become the bedrock of our greatest strength." For Evelyn Carter, what began as a fairy tale romance ended in betrayal, but also ignited her transformation into a resilient mother, an accomplished curator, and the beacon of a new artistic renaissance. Her father's fierce devotion led to a high-stakes showdown that toppled her husband's facade and secured her future. Yet the true triumph lay not in revenge, but in renewal as she rebuilt her life around compassion, creativity, and her precious son. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, one that shows how love and determination can conquer even the darkest betrayals. If this story moved you, please like this video. Share it with friends who need a reminder that strength can blossom from adversity, and subscribe to our channel for more inspirational dramas. Stay tuned. More uplifting stories await.